So Nick, you dropped out of school to focus working full-time on Somni. Would you recommend this route to other student entrepreneurs?
Well, full disclosure, I'm still enrolled at my school. I'm trying to do A-levels at the moment on the side, but it's been quite a challenge kind of in the last few months since launch. I think it's been really cool to have kind of real-world experience in the last 12 months outside of the classroom, kind of in how to build a business, how to raise financing, how to deal with real consumers. But I kind of stopped going to school on a daily basis kind of in early 2012. So that was already 7 months after the original investment. So I think the right time to do it is probably after you've had the proof of concept, so you've got some traction, we had some money. And
when you're bored of the concept, when you're bored of the subjects.
Yeah, when you're bored of school. But I think it's just once you have that kind of initial investment, or you have proof that there are going to be people in the valley who are interested in doing or pursuing your idea, that's probably the best moment then to kind of go out and go 100% on it.
And what do you think needs to be done to spur British entrepreneurship?
It's kind of cool, actually. I've only been doing this for about 18 months now, but in the last kind of 12 months, there's a lot of companies that are emerging out of kind of the Silicon Roundabout Shoreditch initiative that's really inspiring, I think, for UK people. And I don't think it's so much trying to get British people or young British people to be engaged into technology, but it's probably just more in general. I think there should be more of an effort to raise awareness in classrooms and ICT lessons that you can teach yourself how to program, or the tools and the resources are available for free online to do this, and to then to go submit an app on the App Store. It only costs $59, to get that initial license. So if we raise more awareness, I think, to those opportunities, you'll see a lot of younger people getting involved.
And just going on from that, I think there's a huge focus right now on trying to get people to learn how to code. And that's something that the government views as missing from previous British curriculums. And what's your opinion on this? Do you think people are just merely scapegoating a lack of British creativity to the low rates of people who can code?
It's quite interesting, actually. A lot of founders aren't technical. So it's kind of, you're right in saying that it's just because people can't code doesn't mean there can't be innovation. In fact, I think some of the coolest ideas have come out of people who don't actually understand the technology well enough to know the constraints. So they're almost going into it blindly or just more excited. And similarly with me, I mean, I have tried to teach myself artificial intelligence, natural language processing, the fields that summarizations is within. But when I first started this, I was pretty blind to that field. I had no kind of university degree or anything. And so that actually helped me to be almost more courageous in trying to go after this idea. And it's kind of good, though, I think, to see there was this thing that was announced the other day with Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates announcing their
Code.org.
Yeah, Code.org, and there's a lot of people who joined in that initiative. And the UN's doing some stuff to teach coding in kind of lower economically developed countries. So this is all really good stuff. But it's not so much you need to know how to code to do an idea. I think if you have a really good idea, you should just go after it.
And how far do you think the endorsement of celebrity entrepreneurs such as Ashton Kutcher has helped Somni?
It's been really useful, to be honest, in the last launch we've just done to get a lot of the media coverage. It's helpful to have those guys tweeting about it or drawing people's attention straight to the app. But it did come at a latter date. We'd been since I started Somni in 2011 summertime, it took me about 12 months before I kind of had those guys signing contracts to actually invest the money. So it was helpful in the stage of getting the buzz and attention, but in the preliminary stages of just speccing out the idea, how am I going to do this, how am I going to actually develop the app, they're not going to know a lot about coding or technology or who's the best programmer to go to. But they've definitely been really useful.
And can you share with us a little bit more about those early stages when you actually came up with the idea? How did you come up with the idea, and what were the next steps that you took in actually, proving the concept?
I'd been programming in Objective-C, kind of just the native language of iOS, on and off for about 2-3 years since I was 12, just in the side. So it wasn't kind of like I was doing it as my main point of call. It was I was on the side of studying, and I was always trying to come up with new app ideas. And I'd just done a GCSE mock, and I was just using Google and Bing for my research, and I realized there was such an opportunity for someone to come in and collate the internet's information in a really intelligent way. And at the moment, if you look at search engines, you have these search results and then the full page. And that's been the same since the early 90s, since search had the inception of search. And it doesn't take into account the amount of information on the internet. And so if you could have like a textual summary that's algorithmically generated, so it's not requiring humans, because it wouldn't be feasible to have a human write summaries. But if you could somehow order the information with these summaries, it would help people find what they're looking for or discover new content. And then you take that to the iPhone, where there's a 3.5-inch screen or whatever. It makes even more sense to have content that's algorithmically adjusted to fit the length of the screen. That's kind of me saying 18 months now, like since I thought of the idea, why I thought of it. I mean, the real reason why I thought of it was just I was trying to come up with an innovative idea. I thought about the idea of really taking news articles and turn them into tweets. So I did this app called Trim It that tried to take news articles and turn them into tweets and Facebook statuses. And then as I was going through that process, and Apple made it one of their, after I launched it, the thing that got me noticed was Apple featured it as a new note with the app, which is a really important step. And it's going to stamp of validation. Then I began to really see the potential and where we could really take this.
And I think particularly within tech entrepreneurship, there's a huge interest in the lean startup and the concept of MVP. But with something like Sumly, which really requires a lot of algorithmic complexity in order to actually achieve the same sort of level of human understanding, I mean, what's your opinion on that? How did you manage to achieve that?
I mean, so the real breakthrough came in that the investors, so the Li Ka-shing's fund who originally reached out, they had been investors at a few NLP companies before, and most notably Siri. And so because they'd been involved in Siri, now Siri spawned out of the Stanford Research Institute, SRI. It'd been technology that had been developed for the military about 10 to 15 years ago, because they have a large budget, there's a lot of military funding. It then kind of gets declassified and can be commercialized, and that's what happened with Siri. The founders were working at SRI and then built this company. And so because I had the same investors, there was that mutual acquaintance. And so I was introduced to the people who were running the SRI fund, and they looked at Sumly, or my idea at that point. It was basically an idea and a basic algorithm, but merely the idea. And they said, we haven't seen any technology developed in this field yet. It's a new concept. So we are really excited about developing this with you. Because it was new IP that they were going to develop with me, it didn't mean I needed to give away a lot of equity. But if you come out of SRI and basically take some IP on a shelf and say, I'm going to build a company, then you have to give away up to 50% of your company for those resources. But luckily, because this was a new idea, there hadn't been any pre-existing IP, I was able to just work with them. And I had a team of about 6 or 7 PhD students at SRI who were building the algorithm. And so that was a kind of resource. I was very fortunate to have both the investors and the fact that the technology was new.
And many here will admire your ambition and the success that you've achieved to date. But have there been any regrets along the way?
No, it's a really good question. Obviously, there have been with anything. I've been very fortunate that kind of the process has gone quite smoothly for my first proper company. But the number one thing I think I learned, just looking back over the cap table now, how it all worked out, was in the very first round of funding I took, it was $300,000 from Li Ka-shing's fund. It was the fact that we did an equity deal versus a convertible note. And it would have made a lot more sense to do a convertible note where they invest some money at a certain price, but the way it then converts into equity depends on what your valuation is in a year's time or so. Now that would have made a lot more sense economically from my perspective, but then I have no regrets in the sense that I was very fortunate to have those investors at an early stage and them to kind of guide me through this process. But it really was try and give away as little as possible for as long as possible, which is why we've only raised $1.5 million now, which is still quite lean for us kind of a company about kind of what we're doing, because we wanted to keep as much capital within the employees and the original team, and then only go raise VC financing at the appropriate time.
Earlier you mentioned Silicon Valley and also the cluster of technology companies now, growing in East London. Would you move to Silicon Valley, and why? And why would you shun Britain for entrepreneurship?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I've had no problems in London. I mean, I'm traveling. To be honest, I am traveling quite a bit to the Valley, but I like the perspective that you get in London. It's not the Valley is known for not being incestuous, but there's a lot of stuff that happens within the Valley, just with people in the Valley, and it's really good to come kind of from an outside perspective, both with our investors, a lot of them, our primary investors, from an Asian background, so it's good to have that global angle when you're building a company. But maybe one day in the future, I'm still kind of too young really to just move on the other side of the world, but maybe when I'm a bit older, I could look into doing that. But right now, I found London has all the resources that we've required to build Sumly.
Yeah, great. And I really love using Summary personally, but you once said, I think last year, that the idea of scrolling is horrific. What would you say to those such as Peter Thiel, who might say that we wanted flying cars, instead we got 140 characters?
Yeah, the scrolling is horrific quote was I saw that as being quoted about. I mean, my point wasn't that scrolling is horrific. My point was that the notion of having to read through pages and pages of content on a small screen is it's hard work. It's not as favorable as having a summary that fits the screen. That was the context. It wasn't scrolling in general, and so. I stick by that in the sense that it does make more sense that if the technology, and we're not there yet, something does have faults with any piece of NLP, you probably play with Siri, it doesn't work all the time, where it's kind of like in the step in the right direction. And so similarly with Summary, we're trying to get into that state where one day you might have different layers of summaries for different devices. So if you're on a small Android screen, you might just have the headline and a bit of context. But if you're on an iPad, you might have 2 or 3 paragraphs in a summary. And if you're on a desktop, you might have summaries when you're hovering over links. The notion of summarization, I think, is going to become really prevalent in the internet. And so I think this 140 character thing is a different point to what we're doing with Summly. I think with Summly, we require the original content to produce the summary. So we're not trying to kind of dumb down content or shorten content. We're saying there's a lot of long-form content, and that's great. We're going to try and help you decide what you want to read and when. And that's where the summary comes in as this kind of intermediate preview layer. Twitter's a different question, and the 140 characters and trying to get people to condense the information into 140 characters, and that does kind of, you tend to regard less on grammar, for example, and you tend to use a number instead of 2 or whatever. So that's kind of, maybe Peter Thiel's right there, that maybe that's not in the right direction, but I think with summarization, it's trying to go at a different angle.
Right, so I mean, you wouldn't share the view that Summary might be helping cement the fact that we might all be turning into digital goldfish?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're doing with Summly is we're not trying to shorten attention spans. We're not trying to make people only consume short-length content. We're not trying to change the grammar of the English language. We're not trying to do that. I think we're trying to organize information. I see it more as an organization over kind of consumption level. Now, yes, we do want to get to a state where the summaries can be consumed in their own right, and they're informative, and you only have to read the summary to get a notion of what that content's about. But at the moment, our goal was a lot wider. It was even down to the technology. It's domain independent, and it's trying to be language independent. So the idea was we wanted to start ordering the internet with summaries, and we've summarized 2, 3, 4 million articles now since launch. That was only 3, 4 months ago. And so already we're beginning to build this archive of information in this condensed form that no one had really done before. So we see our long-term goal as increasing efficiency when you're consuming content, because if I read 5 summaries, now I'll have a better understanding of which of those 5 stories I want to read, or papers, or books, than if I was to read just the title or just the blurb or whatever came with it originally.
And for you, what are the major opportunities in digitalization of the media industry?
I think there is a big opportunity in this idea of, and so for example, Newsweek just went from print to 100% digital. And I think the companies that start doing that now are going to be better off in the long term than companies that are there are some companies that are known for being quite blind towards this, and they're almost proud of doing this, right? They're proud of not having a digital strategy, we're a print magazine, we've been that for 100 years, we're going to continue that way. But the idea is if you look at the music industry, it was you had albums and you had records before albums, and people were building, when they were compiling their music for an album, for example, they would have 7 or 8 songs that were meant to be listened all at the same time, and this kind of one long stream of music. And similarly, if you ask a magazine editor today what they think a magazine is, they'd say, well, you're meant to read from front to back cover to get all the information that we wanted you to read. They curate it in that regard. But what happened in the music industry was people went from listening to the whole album to just buying individual songs on iTunes, and it's kind of disrupted the whole monetization in the music industry because of this I'll pay per story. It's this on-demand culture, like we want everything right now, we want everything specific. Similarly with news and information, not only is there such an expanse on the internet that am I still going to go pay for a subscription to a magazine where I can get not so much the quality but definitely the quantity of information for free on the internet. but it's also, if I do want to pay for the quality content, that editorial magazine stuff, I might only want to read this one article in particular or this one interview in particular. And that's where the idea of almost like a pay-per-story model for news and just written information might come in. That's kind of what we want to happen, because with Sumly, obviously we give the summaries for free. Now, we did sign a contract with News Corp, for example. The idea is if you have these summaries for free, then you could read the full story and pay. And the idea is, on the basis of the summaries content, would you pay for the full story? Which is kind of interesting to see.
Thanks. And finally, before I hand over to the audience for Q&A, can you please give some advice derived from your personal experience to our aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience?
I mean, yeah, I'm still going through the process, and this is just my first company, but just off kind of thinking about what's happened in the last kind of 12 months, it's really, I had to find a few people who had done this in the past. So, for example, I had this chairman who he was at Amazon in the 90s, and he'd been at these internet companies before, because he had the experience to know, when an investor's trying to screw you over, this is how you deal with it, or this clause shouldn't be in there, or these are the people you need to go talk to. So without some serious people who had had experience in the past, both advisors and employees, I wouldn't have been able to do this. And it really was, I was fortunate to have the Li Ka-shing's people give me the appropriate people to do that, but if I'd been doing this on my own and had no kind of experienced people do this, this wouldn't have taken place. It's really a culmination of everyone's efforts, people coming from different angles, perspectives, backgrounds.
So you're fortunate to have had Li Ka-shing and his foundation, but what about those people who really want that mentor, but don't have the same sort of support that you had?
I mean, there's a lot of, the thing I was even in the early days before those guys approached, there's a lot of kind of just like hackathons or conferences and there are these places you can go meet other people, and you have those advisory-like people also going there because they're trying to find the next young guy with the idea. So it's a two-way relationship where these kind of older people in the industry, and also it's not even age, just more experienced people in the industry are looking for new, fresh, young ideas, and people who want to go and drive, because it's hard, you have to go commit your life to building a company. Yeah. And so I think there are a lot of kind of opportunity where there are, and I think as the internet evolves and there's more and more kind of success stories where people who had no idea about technology or just the first company become very successful, there's almost more of an idea of these kind of more experienced people looking for anyone and anything. It doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter where you live, it could be virtual relationships. It's just how good is the idea and how big is the opportunity, and they're the only two things really that people will evaluate when they're deciding who to work with.
Great, thank you, Nick. I think we'll hand over to the audience for Q&A. If you raise your hand, and then either Nick or myself will choose you.
Could you talk a bit more about the technology behind Trimit and Sumly?
Yeah, sure. So the way we tackled summarization was not a semantic approach. So we weren't trying to look at the meaning of the article, because this would have to be quite a domain-dependent focus. So you'd have to kind of take, for example, weather prediction, or you take news articles for sport. You would have to have this training corpus of content that's just sports articles, and then you would have to try and evaluate kind of discourse markers. So this particular keyword in sport means that this sentence is really important. And so what we did with Sumly is we wanted to kind of order the information on the internet. We wanted to go for this big vision. And so we tried to build quite a shallow system in the sense that it uses the original content in the article and restructures it. So you're using the original words, the original phrases, the original sentences in that article. What we do with Sumly is we use a statistical approach to try and determine which part of the articles are the most important. And that's where we look at things like frequency of the keywords in that article, similarity between one sentence and another sentence in terms of content, the relationship between the title and a sentence, for example, because the title tends to be quite a good synopsis of what the story is going to be about. And you use all these heuristics that are independent of meaning. They're really looking at the language, the morphological structure, the sentence syntax, all of that stuff. And then they say, okay, here are the three highest scoring sentences that we've determined that should be included in the summary. When you get to that stage, we have to try and add a layer of coherence, because if I was to pick three random sentences and stick them together in a paragraph, it's not going to make any sense. So that's when the coherence is the hardest part in this NLP area. Is how do you come up with language that actually makes sense grammatically and is valid? And that's where you try to look at as much as possible the overlap in terms between one sentence and another. Because if you think about it, if two sentences have a lot of term overlap, they seem to have a similar syntax. When they're put together, then they're likely to make sense. And similarly, the easiest thing to do would just be to take 3 sentences that are all together in the article, because the way the author's written it, an author's not going to put 3 sentences together in the same paragraph that have no relationship to one another. And so there's that approach we've used. It's a very mathematical, statistical approach. And going forward, what we want to do is introduce a layer of knowledge into the system. So it maybe can detect it's a sports article and it knows kind of a football score from last week, and it can try and insert that into the summary, or it can give weight to certain parts of the article. But you know, the system's quite young, and we're kind of experimenting with all different approaches to summarization.
So do you manually vet the articles at the end? Sorry, the summaries. Do you manually vet the summaries at the end?
There's no manual. There's no human assistance in the process. What we did do is, in the model I'd kind of come up with was this supervised training. And so you do have a linguist write a bunch of reference summaries, and you come up with this training corpus where the summaries are all written in the same approach the algorithm would have, which is to be confined to the original content in the article. So a human might sit there and go, sentence number 4, 8, and 12, they're the 3 sentences should be included in the summary. And you do that like 1,000 times, you feed that information into the classifier, and then the algorithm begins to learn, okay, well, sentence 4 always seems to be getting selected because of its position or because of its keyword overlap with the title. And then you begin to just weight the heuristics automatically. So there is some human intervention in the sense that it does need a training set. But today, when it's running on its own, there's no human going, oh, that's a bad summary, don't show it in the app. The whole algorithm is self-sustaining.
Hello, can you hear me? Just trying out the microphone. Sorry. I'm a parent. I've got a son who's 16 years old. Obviously, you're quite young. I'd like to know if your parents instilled certain values in you from a young age that you feel helped you to be focused at your age and avoid some of the pitfalls that many young people are facing on the internet right now, which distract them from school and being successful and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I get my dad's actually in the room, so I have to be careful what I say. But
that would be nice.
Yeah, that would be nice. But I think I actually had a lot of, it was a self-teaching process, like being on the internet, and I used to do these, you know, the IRC, the internet chat rooms. When I was first learning to program, you know, I'd go into those chat rooms and have to work with other programmers on this, and I went through a phase where I was gaming a lot, and I went through, you know, I still have Facebook, you know, so the whole social phase of dealing with my friends on the internet and stuff. So a lot of the process was kind of self-nurturing, self-learning. I think the biggest thing that helped me with this whole experience probably was I lived in Australia, we're Australian, so I lived in Australia until I was 7, then I moved to London and lived here. And so it was actually probably getting a global perspective on how kind of business works, and having to deal with people of different nationalities and different time zones is probably the biggest thing that I learned to do at a young age. So that when I actually started getting involved with other people online, I was understanding of the fact that someone might be asleep right now in another time zone and not to keep pinging them or whatever. Or I understood the fact that getting a programmer in Asia might be just as good as getting a programmer next door in London. Like the idea was it wasn't so much where you're based, it was just the quality. So getting used to those concepts, or currency, you know, like when you submit an app to the App Store, you get money, if you make it a paid app, you get money coming in all the different currencies of the different stores. And so just having a kind of understanding of how the global ecosystem works, how to develop a product that's independent, that was probably really helpful. And then also I think, you know, I went to quite a good school, so at school we had ICT lessons. They did give us a bit of awareness to programming and stuff, but it was more about, I think, at school learning all the different subjects. And with Sumly, like, I did a lot of languages at school, so it was a combination of maths, language, talking, you know, it was all the different things I learned at school came into play when I started it.
Hi, Nick. My question is kind of twofold. So you said that you've obviously built Trimit before Sumly, and then Li Ka-shang came in and they supported your app, and then you went to Stanford and had these PhD students help you with the algorithm. How much of that were you able to make or build yourself, and how were you able to convince them to sort of keep you on as the founder? You know, they could have just taken your idea and built it. You know, you were very young, and how did you convince them of your value?
That's actually a really good point. I think there would have been people, especially scientists or very technical people, who've gone, you're 17, what do you know about this stuff? I'm going to go do it myself. That might be happening right now, actually. I don't know what's about to get launched. It probably has. In fact, it definitely is, I reckon. And that's cool, because the real reason I think that Summoney's had the success it has, and hopefully will continue to, is it was just the whole thing. It wasn't so much just the algorithm, because an algorithm on its own, as an input, as an output, but what are you going to do with the output? Where is the input coming from? And it's kind of like with Summoney, it was, the whole algorithm was built in mind for this iPhone app. How do we get summaries for humans, for consumers? It was really about the notion of consuming news and information in a summarized way. So I think the real success behind Summoney is beyond the algorithm. It comes down to the story, it comes down to the product, it comes down to the users, the investors, the team. And actually, what I do today on a day, I don't program the algorithm anymore. I let the scientists do that. I mean, I built the original algorithm, so I have quite a good understanding of how this NLP stuff works. I try and keep on, definitely from a logical standpoint, how it's working. But there does come a point as well where you do need people who have had a lot of experience to take on and really bring the bar of the algorithm to another level.
Thank you. You mentioned that perhaps the future of the internet is summarizing content, helping people find things more easily. And also you said that monetizing summaries, for example, with News Corp, might be important. Mm-hmm. But would you ever consider training journalists to identify better sentences to make your algorithm mine more efficiently, or even maybe some sort of article metadata to let people volunteer important phrases, sentences? This
is precisely what we were hoping that's going to happen. In raising awareness with this algorithm, there's you probably know Instapaper, which is one of these iPhone app services where you can save articles to read later. And what they do is they have a piece of HTML code that you can put into that article, which makes it kind of Instapaper friendly. So that instead of the Instapaper app having to scrape the content, it can be quite messy, it just knows this is the article text, here's the text. Similarly with summaries, it would be awesome if if a journalist was willing to go, this sentence, and this sentence are the 3 sentences that should be included in the summary. We could feed that as training data in that supervised system into the algorithm, and suddenly the algorithm get a lot smarter, which is precisely why I do want to work with publishers, where at least when you work with a publisher or a company that has editorial teams, they can tell their editors to do this. The real question is how many journalists are willing to sit there and then go about tagging it themselves, or even fundamentally or philosophically agree with the point of why is my content getting ruined by this algorithm. So there's all of those fair points to be made, because they are fair points, and can a machine produce output as coherent as a human? Probably not today. But I think we wanted to almost do this as the way I see Summary and everything as it is today is more like a demo of this is what the future is going to be like. This is what we're doing now. It was a proof of concept, and so we're okay not having the whole world on this at the moment. It's more like we're on the right track, and wherever the environment is for Summary to fit in the future, I'd love to be a part of it.
Hello. I hope that this doesn't sound creepy, but what is your average day like from waking up until going to bed?
Okay. Well, at the moment, the average day really does vary, because, typically what's happening at the moment is I'm doing a lot of traveling. So, I'll literally be in San Francisco, or I'll be on a plane somewhere. I tend to have a lot of phone calls. It really is. We have an office in London, and I do have some face-to-face meetings here, but it's really built up with a lot of phone calls to San Francisco and New York, specifically with the kind of product people, the tech people in San Francisco. And we're actually quite kind of currently kind of in more negotiation. The last few months we've been talking to investors and companies about kind of deals and things. So it's actually a lot of it spent at the moment with kind of lawyers or looking at contracts, specific, and it's quite fun because every phase of the journey has a different kind of set of people you deal with. So prior to launch, it was all with the programmers and designers, and it was coming up with the best app. Then it went to kind of the PR, so I was doing a lot of interviews in America or here, and it was a lot of TV and all that stuff. And now it's really at this point where it's more like lawyers and people who are helping the kind of the business people, BD people, kind of structure these contracts and focus on that side of things. So it varies, but yeah.
Nick, another question. I know it's quite a standard question probably, but how do you go about finding team members? How many people are working for you at the moment? And are you still the youngest person in the team? And how do you deal with, you know, older people?
Yeah.
And
Adults are scary.
And to take that as a compliment, because I think you come across a lot older than you are.
Yeah. But sometimes I still walk into a room and go, there's just a bunch of adults here, you know, it's kind of scary. Yeah. But, you know, at the same time, I think I've just been like dropped into the deep end. Like it was just, and when I was 15 to 17 is a big difference. So like now I'm more like, you know, I kind of pretty much am an adult. I'll be 18 later this year. But when I was 15, it was, you know, it's like literally I had to be chaperoned everywhere. I couldn't get a plane, you know, all 10 of these reasons why. And so it's been a very interesting process, learning how to deal with adults. And the number one thing I didn't really consider that much is kind of like personal life. And it's kind of like, obviously at my age, I don't, you know, I have a girlfriend or whatever, but I don't have like a, you know, family and children and other, you know, things to deal with. and the real thing is it's like, you know, some of the employees or people we work with, you know, they do have a lot of other responsibilities, and it's just about understanding that and dealing with people. And then similarly, I think with the team of people we got, I am still the youngest person. It's actually kind of more of a senior team. We have a lot of people who are kind of experienced. I've had 20 years of, especially on the technical side, we wanted to get the best scientists in the world for summarization so we could have this stamp of approval. So we've been working with a lot of people who've had 20, 30 years of experience. And that's been a really enjoyable experience in learning, just literally learning information from these people and just gaining insight. Because obviously people who've done it a few times, especially with companies, have they're a bit more cynical, but then they also have a lot of advice and they'll tell you things that you'll never learn kind of in a textbook.
Was it easy for you to convince them or to get them passionate about Sumly?
I think I was fortunate to have the kind of Li Ka-shing style of investor come in at an early stage, because that got people excited because it was just that level of investor. So there have been people who have totally just disregarded me just because of my age, just won't take me seriously or won't even, you can just tell they're not into that, what do you know kind of thing. At the same time, people who kind of, you know, normally what happens is I have my chairman in the room who's kind of like an older, more experienced person. And when there's that relationship in the room, it's almost like a double act where I can be young and enthusiastic, but more free, and then he'll add that stamp of validity to it. Whereas in the early days when it was just me on my own, then you'd have people who'd react like, what is this? kind of reaction. It's like, you know, what is this? So that was always fun.
Hi, I have another question. You talked about when you were younger and being like chaperoned around, and now you're traveling loads. Is there any consistency to your day-to-day life? Is there like a core team that travels with you? Because I can imagine it being quite lonely having to travel around the world.
Yeah, no, I have, so kind of my business, the chairman, this kind of person who helps run the company with me is always with me, because in meetings he has to be there. For the PR stuff, you know, when we're doing those PR trips, there's a lot of phone calls and you go on media. You know, I had no experience with media in the past, so I had these people come on board to kind of help advise me. And I have the same person basically with me at all times since September 2011. Anytime I do a piece of TV or an interview or an article, you know, he'll be there in the room. That adds that kind of consistency, kind of calms me down, obviously, before you're about to, you know, do something like a television interview. So there is a consistency or a group of people who tend to come with me. And so it would be really hard if every time I traveled it was 100% on my own. But as it's been for the last 18 months, because we are building a company and a team, you do have the same people who are really excited as well, and they share the same, and they know me, and they know, you know, kind of how I behave, and you know, it's like it's understanding that, you know, right? Well, not an entourage, look at that, but kind of people who are helping, yeah. Yeah, I think with Sumly, like the idea was to get as many users as possible, as quickly as possible. So we just wanted to get a free app. We start off with an iPhone app. We have an Android app almost ready to go. The kind of goal at the moment is to get as many users, consolidate the fact that summaries are a means of content to be consumed. We have thought about monetization, like a subscription model where you pay for Sumly as a service and you get this layer of summaries on the web above, you know, the traditional content. That could be independent of publishers because the summary is a different form of content. There's all of these fair use, copyright, kind of, it's a gray area. You know, do we own the summary? Does the original author of the article own the summary. But we're pretty confident that we're in kind of fair use. We're stripping the information. Currently, we're not making any money, so there's not been one single case of someone saying, take the summaries off the service. But I always kind of fundamentally see summary as probably more of a feature than a product. It's kind of inevitably going to be integrated, hopefully into kind of a large service or a company or a team of people who want to have the hundreds of millions of users or have the internet's information. And summary would be an amazing overlay to that, where you have these summaries of all of the information, but kind of as a standalone product that you go on every day. And what that was more of a kind of, here's a demonstration of technology, here's what it will be. And the end goal really is to go very large and integrate into as many services as possible.
And we'll have one more question. Who can shout the loudest? No.
Okay.
Hi Nick, congratulations on the success of Sumly. I'm just curious, let's say you made a big juicy exit soon. Are you already looking into the next startup you want to do? I mean, what would you still carry on with news, or are you looking somewhere else?
No, I probably wouldn't carry on with news. I'm actually really interested in music recommendation, and like an algorithmic approach to that. Now, there's Pandora in the US, which is like an internet radio where they it's more looking at kind of, yes, they look at the music itself, but they also look at social integration and like your friend listens to this and you listen to this. But like the idea of pure music recommendation, where it's looking at, I don't know what it is because I haven't thought of this, but it's looking at the music itself almost, again, mathematically, a bit like how we looked at the language mathematically, or it's looking at brainwaves or the way you react to kinds of music and like a really deep understanding of music. So again, I like AI, I like technology algorithms, and so applying algorithms to all other areas or facets would be really interesting. So, but there's still, I think, quite a bit to go with Sumly and kind of where I want to take it. Even if we do get acquired, I do want to kind of help make sure that the vision I had with Sumly is seen through, and we really do have summaries hopefully everywhere on the internet.
Well, I think on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you, Nick, for coming to Oxford today.